A single stroke of buttery yellow paint, meant for our baby's nursery, somehow sparked a war with my powerful father-in-law that threatened to steal our unborn child. The smell of fresh paint always used to make me happy. It smelled like a new beginning, like progress. That Saturday, my wife Emily and I were drenched in it, a soft, buttery yellow that she'd picked out for the nursery. We were laughing, covered in specks of it, my arm around her as she carefully painted a little cloud on the wall. At 7 months pregnant, she moved with a deliberate grace that still took my breath away. Her face was flushed with joy, and in that moment our small house felt like a palace. The world outside, with its deadlines and bills and worries, simply didn't exist. It was just us, our unborn child, and the future we were literally painting onto our walls. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly chime, it was a sharp, impatient buzz that sliced through our peaceful bubble. Emily and I exchanged a look. We weren't expecting anyone. My heart gave a little thud of dread. I already knew who it was. There's only one person who rings our doorbell like they're trying to break it. I wiped my hands on a rag and went to the door. Standing on our porch, looking as if he'd just stepped out of a boardroom and was disgusted to find himself in our modest neighborhood, was my father-in-law, Richard. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking suit, not a single gray hair out of place, his face set in its usual expression of mild disapproval. "Richard," I said, forcing a smile. "This is a surprise." He didn't smile back. His eyes scanned my paint-splattered t-shirt and jeans with thinly veiled contempt. So it would seem. "Is my daughter here?" He pushed past me without waiting for an answer, his polished leather shoes clicking on our hardwood floor. He surveyed our living room, his gaze lingering on a stack of books I hadn't put away yet, and I felt a familiar wave of inadequacy wash over me. It was his superpower. He could make you feel like a failure just by breathing your air. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Emily came out of the nursery, her paintbrush still in her hand. Her smile was genuine, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She loved her father, but she wasn't blind to his flaws. "I was in the area," he said, his tone suggesting the area was some sort of toxic waste dump he'd been forced to traverse. "Thought I'd see how you were, and this." He gestured vaguely around the room. "Still playing house, I see." I clenched my jaw but said nothing. It was his opening shot, the little jab to test the waters. Arguing would only make it worse. Emily, bless her heart, tried to steer the conversation. "We're painting the nursery. Do you want to see?" She led him to the small room, and I followed, feeling like a condemned man walking to the gallows. Richard stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. He stared at the soft yellow walls, the half-finished cloud, the unassembled crib still in its box in the corner. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. "Yellow," he finally said, the word dripping with disdain. "How pedestrian." "I like it," Emily said, her voice a little tight. "It's cheerful." "It's the color of cowardice," he countered, looking directly at me. "But I suppose it's fitting." And there it was. The gloves were off. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to do this for Emily. Keep the peace. Don't rise to the bait. "It's a classic color for a nursery, Richard," I said, my voice level. He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "And what would you know about classics, Alex? You, a man who makes a living creating, what is it you call them? Logos. For fly-by-night tech companies that will be bankrupt in a year. My daughter is carrying my grandchild, and she's living in a tiny bungalow being supported by a glorified cartoonist." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to wound. He knew my insecurities. He knew I worried about providing, about being good enough for his daughter, for our baby. He was taking those fears and twisting them into a weapon. Emily put her hand on my arm. "Dad, stop it." But he was on a roll now. He stepped into the room, his expensive shoes carefully avoiding a stray drop of paint on the floor. "I'm not stopping anything. I'm speaking the truth. This child needs stability. It needs a proper legacy, not this." He waved a dismissive hand at our humble home, at me. "This child is going to need a real man to look up to, a man of substance and ambition, not some artist playing with colors in a spare room, pretending to build a future. The air went still. The insult hung there, sharp and glittering and cruel. He had taken the most beautiful moment of my life, the sacred space we were creating for our child, and he had defiled it. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, to defend myself, my family. But I never got the chance, because Emily, who had been standing silently beside me, her knuckles white around the handle of her paintbrush, immediately took a step forward. Her face was a mask of cold fury I had never seen before. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply raised the paintbrush, the one loaded with the soft, buttery yellow paint he'd called pedestrian, and with a single deliberate motion she drew a thick, bright, buttery yellow stripe right down the front of his ridiculously expensive suit. The stroke was smooth and unwavering, a bold line of sunshine bisecting the dark, tailored grey wool, from lapel to hem. The paint, thick and viscous, began to slowly drip onto his polished shoes. The silence in the small room was absolute, broken only by the soft, wet sound of that single drop hitting the floor. Richard looked down at his chest. His eyes widened, first in utter disbelief, then in a slow-blooming, volcanic fury. The color drained from his face, replaced by a blotchy, dangerous red. He looked from the yellow stripe on his suit to the matching paint on the brush in his daughter's hand, and then to her face. "Have you," he began, his voice a low, trembling growl, "completely lost your mind?" "No," Emily said. Her voice was steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. She lowered the brush, but she didn't back down an inch. "I think I just found it." "This is him!" Richard roared, finally finding his volume. He jabbed a shaking finger at me. "This is what he's done to you. This nobody has turned my daughter into a gutter snipe who defaces her own father." "He's done nothing but love me," Emily shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. "Something you talk about but seem to know very little about. You will not come into my home, the home I am building with my husband, and insult the man I love. You will not stand in the room we are making for our child and poison it with your bitterness and your bile. You don't get to do that anymore." She took another step closer, and for the first time in his life, I saw Richard flinch away from his own daughter. "This," she said, gesturing to the yellow walls, to me, to her own swollen belly, "is our life, the life we chose, the life we are building. It may not be up to your standards, Dad, but the thing you've never understood is that your standards don't apply here. Our happiness is not up for your approval. Now I think you should leave." "Leave?" he sputtered, aghast. "You paint my suit like some kind of vandal, and you tell me to leave." "Yes," she said simply. "Get out of my house." He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was looking for a weakness, a crack in her resolve he could exploit, but he found nothing. He saw only a woman he no longer recognized, a woman he could no longer control. His gaze shifted to me, burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "You will regret this," he snarled, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think you've won? You think you can steal my daughter and get away with it? I will ruin you, Alex. I will dismantle your pathetic little life, piece by piece, until you have nothing left. And you," he looked back at Emily, "will come crawling back, begging for my help. Both of you." He turned on his heel, the yellow stripe on his suit like a badge of his defeat, and stormed out of the house. The front door slammed shut with a force that rattled the windows. The ensuing silence felt deafening. Emily stood perfectly still for a moment, the paintbrush still in her hand. Then a long, shaky breath escaped her lips, and the brush clattered to the floor. I rushed to her side, wrapping my arms around her. She sagged against me, burying her face in my paint-splattered t-shirt. I could feel her trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry?" I pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in my hands. "Emily, that was the most incredible thing I have ever seen. You were a warrior." A small, watery smile touched her lips. He crossed a line. "He obliterated the line," I said, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in my chest. "He's probably calling his tailor right now to have him arrested." We both started laughing then, a cathartic, slightly unhinged sound that filled the little yellow room. We had stood up to the dragon, And we had won. We spent the rest of the evening in a state of giddy relief. We cleaned up the paint, ordered pizza, and sat on the couch with our feet up, talking about baby names. For the first time, I felt like the shadow of her father wasn't looming over us. We were free. We were our own family. Around 10 o'clock, as we were getting ready for bed, Emily's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing. "It's my mom." I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Her mother, Eleanor, was a sweet woman, but utterly terrified of her husband. She rarely called this late unless something was wrong. Emily answered, putting it on speaker. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Emily, honey." Eleanor's voice was a frantic whisper, laced with panic. "Thank God you answered. I can't talk for long. He's in his study." "Mom, what's wrong? You sound scared," Emily said, her hand finding mine. "It's your father. He came home. Emily, the things he was saying, I've never seen him like this. He's on the phone. He's been on the phone for hours, making calls." "What calls?" I asked, leaning closer to the phone. "Who is he calling?" There was a pause and the sound of a door creaking in the background. Eleanor's voice dropped even lower, so low we could barely hear it. "His lawyers," she whispered. "He's talking about parental fitness, about you and Alex. Oh, Emily." Her voice broke with a sob. "He said he's going to prove you're both unfit parents. He said he's going to take the baby." The words, "take the baby," sucked all the air out of the room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a panicked bird trapped in a cage. Emily's face went bone white. The giddy triumph we'd felt just hours before curdled into pure, icy fear. This wasn't just about insults and expensive suits anymore. This was a declaration of war. Richard wasn't just trying to hurt us. He was trying to destroy us. "Mom," Emily said, her voice shaking but firm, "what exactly did you hear?" "He was talking about Alex's job, calling it unstable," Eleanor whispered frantically. "He mentioned your violent outburst, the paint. He's twisting everything. He has a private investigator digging into Alex's past, his family, anything he can find. He told his lawyer he has unlimited resources to prove you're living in an unsafe and financially insecure environment. Emily, he's serious. He means to do it." A click on the other end, and the line went dead. Eleanor had hung up. Emily and I just stared at each other, the silence thick with unspoken terror. The man wasn't just a bully. He was a monster, willing to tear his own daughter's life apart to prove a point. We held each other tightly that night, but sleep felt a million miles away. Every creak of the house sounded like an approaching threat. The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. A letter arrived from a high-powered law firm, formally notifying us of Richard's intent to sue for custody of our unborn child on grounds of parental unfitness. It was filled with legalese and slander, painting me as a deadbeat artist and Emily as an emotionally unstable woman under my negative influence. We had to hire our own lawyer, a kind but expensive woman, who told us that while Richard's case was flimsy, a man with his wealth and connections could drag this out for months, draining us emotionally and financially before the baby was even born. The joy of preparing for our child was replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. Every purchase, from diapers to a new car seat, felt fraught with the possibility that it would all be for nothing. The yellow nursery, once our happy sanctuary, started to feel like a courtroom exhibit. The breaking point came one rainy Tuesday. I came home from a meeting with a new client, a big one that could have provided some much-needed financial stability only, to find the contract had been abruptly cancelled. No reason was given, but I knew. Richard was making good on his promise to dismantle my life. I sat in my car in the driveway, the letter from his lawyers on the passenger seat, the email from the client on my phone, and I felt the weight of it all crash down on me. He was going to win. He was going to bleed us dry and take our baby, and there wasn't a thing I could do. That's when I saw Emily walking out of the house. She wasn't carrying a purse. She was carrying a small, dusty shoebox from the back of her closet. Her face was set with a resolve that startled me. "Get in," she said, her voice calm. "We're going to my parents' house." "Emily, what are you doing? We can't just—" "Just trust me," she said. And I did. When we arrived, Eleanor met us at the door, her eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't be here. He's in a terrible mood." "We're not here to fight, Mom. We're here to end this," Emily said, and walked past her towards Richard's study. We found him behind his massive mahogany desk, looking every bit the king in his castle. He looked up, a sneer forming on his lips. "Have you come to beg for forgiveness?" "No," Emily said, placing the shoebox on his desk with a soft thud. "I've come to remind you of something." She opened the box. Inside were old photographs, faded and curled at the edges. But more than that, there were letters, stacks of them, tied in ribbon. Richard's face changed. The sneer vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then recognition, then alarm. "These," Emily began, her voice ringing with a strength I'd never heard, "are the letters you wrote to Mom when you were first courting her. You were a junior architect then, living in a tiny apartment. You had no money, no legacy, no connections." She picked one up. "In this one, you talk about being afraid you weren't good enough for her, but that you would spend your entire life trying to be." She picked up another. "Here, you describe how you'd paint her dream house yourselves, even if the color was a ridiculous pedestrian yellow, because it was her favorite." She laid the letters out on his desk, a paper trail of the man he used to be, the man who had nothing but love and ambition, the man who was so much like me. "This man," she said, her voice softening, "is the man my mother fell in love with. This is the man who built this empire from nothing. You weren't born into this, Dad. You earned it. You fought for it. You were once the young man with nothing but a dream, terrified of failing the woman you loved. Just like Alex." Richard stared at the letters, his hands trembling slightly. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I didn't see contempt in his eyes. I saw himself, a younger, poorer, more hopeful version of himself. "You're trying to destroy in him," Emily said quietly, "the very man you used to be. And you're willing to destroy me and your own grandchild to do it. Why? Because you're scared? Because you look at us and you're reminded of how hard it was, how close you came to failing." The silence in the study was profound. Richard looked at the letters, at his wife who was now standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes, at his pregnant daughter, and at me. The mask of the powerful tycoon crumbled, revealing a tired, old man. He slowly reached out and picked up one of his own letters. He read it, and a long, shuddering sigh escaped his lips. "The lawsuit will be dropped in the morning," he said, his voice raspy. He didn't look at us. He couldn't. We walked out of that house and didn't look back. There were no grand apologies, no tearful reunions. But the war was over. A week later, a ridiculously large and ornate crib was delivered to our house. There was no card. We knew who it was from. We put it together in our little yellow nursery, and as I stood there with my arm around my wife, looking at the soft clouds she'd painted on the walls, I knew we were finally safe. Our new beginning smelled faintly of fresh paint.